The crosshairs settled on the window 300 meters away. Through the scope, she could see the dark rectangle of the opening, 2 meters wide, 1 meter tall. Stone walls, second floor, the barrel of the machine gun just visible in the morning light. Her finger rested on the trigger, not pulling, not yet, just resting there with the lightest possible touch. 4 counts in through the nose, 6 counts out through barely parted lips. The breathing rhythm her father had taught her at a kitchen table in Chicago when she was 14 years old. The grass moved in the breeze. Southwest wind, maybe 6 kilometers per hour. She'd been watching it for nearly 2 hours, learning its patterns, feeling it against her face, calculating what it would do to a bullet over 300 meters. I learned to shoot when I was 12 years old. My targets were rats, big ones, bold ones, the kind that bit children while they slept. By the time I was 23, the targets were men. I never missed. The scope showed movement in the shadows at the back of the room. Someone stepping forward, someone who didn't know that in the next 30 seconds his life would end. Her finger took up the slack in the trigger. 0.3 pounds of pressure, 0.4, right there on the edge. Ready. Then everything went black. The screen cut to darkness. White text appeared. 72 hours earlier. The briefing room was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of wet wool. August 12th, 1944. Somewhere in France, 4 days after the landings had torn open the Atlantic Wall and sent American boys streaming inland through hedgerows and fields that turned into graveyards. The map on the wall showed a farmhouse, a simple building surrounded by outbuildings and stone walls. Someone had drawn red X marks around it, 47 of them, each one representing an American soldier who had died trying to take that position in the last 72 hours. The officer at the front of the room was speaking, but his voice had the hollow quality of a man who'd watched too many good plans fail. 4 attempts in 3 days, 2 infantry assaults that had been cut to pieces before they got within 100 meters. 1 artillery barrage that had missed entirely because the spotters couldn't get close enough to call in accurate coordinates. 1 tank disabled at 600 meters by a gunner so skilled he'd put a round through the vision slit before the crew even knew they were in range. The primary gunner is 18 years old, German sniper school, already eliminated 2 Allied snipers who tried to take him. The boy thinks 3 moves ahead. He's not just good, he's exceptional. We need a miracle. The room was silent except for the rain against the windows. Men looked at the map, at the red X marks at each other. No one had a solution. No one wanted to suggest another frontal assault that would just add more marks to that wall. Then a woman stood up, young, black, wearing the uniform of the OSS with corporal stripes on her sleeves. Her voice was quiet but absolutely certain. "I can make the shot, sir." Every eye in the room turned to her. In the silence that followed, you could hear the rain, the breathing of a dozen men, the weight of what she'd just offered to do. Chicago's South Side. In the winter of 1933 looked like God had turned his back on the world and forgotten to return. The Great Depression had settled over the city like a fog that wouldn't lift. 300,000 black Americans lived in a narrow strip called the Black Belt, confined there by restrictive covenants and racial violence. An area designed for maybe a third that number. The apartment above the grocery store on 43rd Street had 2 rooms. In winter, it was cold enough to see your breath. In summer, it was an oven. Always it was too small. But Lorraine Hartwell kept it immaculate. She believed in dignity as a form of resistance, in pressed clothes and polished shoes and perfect grammar as armor against a world that wanted to see her family as less than human. Her husband Nathaniel worked inconsistent hours at a meatpacking plant when his leg allowed it, the leg that had caught German shrapnel in France in 1918. The leg that never healed right. The leg that reminded him every single day that he'd fought for freedoms America would not grant him. He rarely spoke about the war, about serving with the 369th Infantry Regiment, the Harlem Hellfighters, about the bronze star pinned to a uniform he kept wrapped in paper in the back of the closet. But he kept his service rifle, a 1917 Enfield, wrapped in oilcloth, hidden behind the winter coats. His daughter found it while searching for Christmas presents. Evelyn was 12 years old. She didn't touch the rifle that first time, just looked at it, fascinated by its weight, its precision, the way it represented a chapter of her father's life he would not discuss. She came back to look at it again and again. The rats came that winter. The worst year of the Depression, when families in the building couldn't afford to dispose of garbage properly and the creatures multiplied in the walls and alleys. They were bold, those rats, big as cats, some of them, utterly unafraid of humans. They ate through food supplies that families could not afford to replace. They bit children in their sleep. Old Mrs. Patterson on the 3rd floor contracted an infection from a bite and lost her hand at Cook County Hospital. The doctors there didn't try very hard to save the hand of a poor black woman. Maybe they could have. Maybe they just didn't care enough. Nathaniel Hartwell was too exhausted, too broken by his wounds and his disappointments to address the problem, so his daughter took matters into her own hands. She couldn't fire the Enfield, of course. The noise would have brought police complaints chaos. A 12-year-old colored girl with a rifle would not end well in Chicago in 1933. So she practiced everything else. Loading and unloading by feel alone in total darkness, breathing, stance, trigger discipline. She read everything she could find about marksmanship at the public library, military manuals, hunting guides, anything with information about ballistics and windage and the geometry of sending a small piece of metal exactly where you wanted it to go. Then she turned to other weapons, quieter ones. A slingshot first purchased with pennies saved from running errands for neighbors, then a pellet gun bought with 6 months of hoarded coins, money that could have gone to food, money she spent instead on the ability to solve the rat problem herself. She practiced in the alley behind the building in the grey hours before dawn, when she could see well enough to aim, but the neighborhood was still asleep. The rats became her targets. They were quick, unpredictable. They required precision. They did not give second chances. If you missed, they disappeared into the walls. If you wounded one, it screamed and brought the others. You had to make the first shot count. 1 shot, 1 kill. By the time Evelyn was 14, she was the most accurate shooter on the South Side. Nobody knew it, except the rats and her own quiet satisfaction. By 16, she could put a pellet through a bottle cap at 30 meters. She had rid her building so thoroughly of vermin that neighbors started asking Nathaniel what his secret was. He discovered what his daughter had been doing on an April morning in 1937. He woke early with his leg aching, walked to the kitchen for water. Through the window he saw Evelyn in the alley below, utterly still, utterly focused, the pellet gun raised and ready. He watched her wait, watched her breathe, watched the patience that most soldiers never learned even after years of training. A rat emerged from behind a trash can, moving fast, erratic. The kind of shot that required you to lead the target to predict where it would be in the fraction of a second between decision and impact. Evelyn did not rush. She waited for the moment. The one perfect moment when the target paused, when all the variables aligned, when the shot became possible. She took it. The rat dropped mid-stride. Instant death. Nathaniel Hartwell never mentioned what he saw. He understood that his daughter had taught herself something valuable, something that couldn't be untaught, something he recognized because he'd learned it himself in the trenches of France. That evening he took the Enfield from the closet, sat down at the kitchen table, laid the rifle between them, and began to teach his daughter everything he knew about shooting. The principles of trajectory, the mathematics of distance, how to read wind by watching grass and leaves and the flight of birds, how to wait sometimes for hours for the right moment, the only moment, and most importantly, how to remain calm when everything depended on a single, irreversible action. Father and daughter sat at that kitchen table 2 or 3 evenings a week for the next 2 years, speaking a language of angles and adjustments that Lorraine Hartwell did not understand but recognized as something precious. A bridge between her husband's broken past and her daughter's uncertain future. Nathaniel never explained why he was teaching her these things. Perhaps he sensed what was coming. Perhaps he simply needed to pass on the one thing the country had given him that still felt wholly his own. On a spring evening in 1939, as Evelyn cleaned the Enfield after practice, her father spoke words he had never said before. "War's coming, baby girl. I can feel it. Same way I felt it in 17. Evelyn looked up from the rifle. Her father's face was serious, sad in a way she didn't fully understand yet. "When it comes," he said quietly, "you'll need this more than I did." Evelyn was 18 years old by then, working as a secretary at a black-owned insurance company on South Parkway. She followed the news carefully, tracing German advances on maps she bought at the 5 and dime, imagining the distances, the terrain, the challenges of sending accurate fire across the hedgerows and forests she read about in newspaper accounts. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, she knew immediately that she would find a way to serve. The obstacles were immense. The American military was rigidly segregated, black soldiers confined to support roles and labor battalions, denied the opportunity to serve in combat positions where they might prove themselves equal to white soldiers. The Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, established in May 1942, accepted black women, but only in limited numbers, in segregated units, exclusively in administrative and support positions. The idea of a black woman serving as a combat soldier, let alone a sniper, was so far outside the realm of possibility that it did not even register as something to be formally prohibited. It was simply unthinkable. Evelyn Hartwell thought it anyway. She enlisted in the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps in August 1942, 2 weeks after the first class of black women was accepted. She was assigned to a segregated unit at Fort Des Moines, Iowa, where she trained as a typist and file clerk. She excelled at the work. She had always been organized and precise, but she made sure to also excel at everything physical. She was the fastest runner in her unit. She scored highest on every fitness assessment. When a training sergeant organized informal marksmanship practice for interested personnel, she attended every session, careful to perform well, but not so well as to draw excessive attention. She was drawing attention anyway. Her unit commander was Captain Margaret Anderson, 42 years old, a former school teacher from Alabama who had joined the Corps with modest expectations and found herself constantly surprised by the quality of the women under her command. She noticed Evelyn Hartwell immediately, noticed her discipline, her intelligence, the way other women in the unit naturally looked to her for guidance. During a routine inspection in October 1942, Captain Anderson asked Evelyn what she hoped to do in the military. Evelyn considered lying. Considered saying something safe about wanting to serve her country in whatever capacity was needed, about being grateful for the opportunity, about not expecting anything beyond what was offered. But something in Captain Anderson's eyes made her tell the truth. A directness, a genuine curiosity. "I want to be a sniper, ma'am." The words hung in the air between them. Captain Anderson was quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that meant she was actually thinking rather than simply dismissing the idea out of hand. Then she said that what Evelyn wanted was impossible. The military would never allow it. Society would never accept it. The very idea would be seen as absurd, offensive, dangerous to the established order. "I understand, ma'am. Do you—" "Yes, ma'am. But I can still type faster than anyone else in this unit if you teach me properly." Captain Anderson laughed. A short, surprised sound. Then she said something else, something that would change the trajectory of Evelyn Hartwell's service. "I have a cousin in the Office of Strategic Services, the intelligence agency. They operate behind enemy lines. They're less rigid than the regular military, more willing to use unconventional personnel for unconventional missions." She paused, met Evelyn's eyes. "I can't promise anything, but I could write a letter." Evelyn Hartwell spent the next 14 months typing, filing, and waiting. She continued her private marksmanship practice whenever possible, maintaining her skills with whatever weapons she could access. She studied maps of Europe, learned basic French from a borrowed grammar book, read everything she could find about German military tactics and equipment. And she waited. The letter that changed her life arrived in December 1943, brief, official, revealing almost nothing. She was to report to a training facility in Virginia for assessment regarding specialized duties. No details about what those duties might be or why she had been selected, just an order to report. The night before she left, her father called her into the kitchen, the same kitchen where he had taught her to calculate windage and bullet drop. He looked older now. The war years had aged him, even though he wasn't fighting in this one. The limp was worse. "They'll use you, Evie. Use what you can do. Then they'll forget you, bury your record, pretend you never existed." He reached across the table, took her hand, just like they did to me and every other coloured soldier who ever wore this country's uniform. Evelyn nodded. She knew this already, had accepted it as the price of what she wanted to do. "But you're still going to go," Nathaniel said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. You know why? Because it's what we do." Her father squeezed her hand. In his eyes she saw pride mixed with sorrow, the burden of understanding what she was choosing, what it would cost her. "That's right, baby girl. It's what we do." The facility was a converted country estate in the Virginia countryside, surrounded by woods and security fences and an atmosphere of deliberate mystery. Evelyn arrived to find herself among perhaps 30 other candidates, all women, about a third of them black, all selected through similarly opaque processes. They were told they were being evaluated for potential service with the OSS in roles that would be explained only to those who passed the assessment. The evaluation would last 3 weeks. It would be difficult. Most of them would not be selected. The first week focused on physical conditioning and basic military skills, the kind of training Evelyn had already mastered at Fort Des Moines. She performed well, but not exceptionally, still wary of standing out too much. The second week introduced more specialized content: map reading, surveillance techniques, basic intelligence gathering, the fundamentals of operating behind enemy lines. Evelyn excelled at all of it, her natural precision and patience serving her well in exercises that required observation and analysis. The third week brought weapons training, and Evelyn finally allowed herself to show what she could do. The instructor was a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant named Harold Cross, a veteran of the Pacific Campaign, missing the ring finger on his left hand, a permanent squint from too many years staring through rifle scopes. He taught the candidates to shoot the way he had been taught, through repetition, discipline, endless correction. He was methodical, demanding, completely uninterested in his students' backgrounds or personal stories. He cared only about results. On the first day of rifle training, he had each candidate fire 5 rounds at a target 50 meters away. Most of the women managed to hit the target. A few hit the center rings. Evelyn Hartwell put all 5 rounds through the same hole. Sergeant Cross walked down to the target, examined it closely, walked back to where she stood. His face showed nothing. "Do it again." She did. Same result. 5 rounds, 1 hole. He had her shoot at 75 meters, then 100. Then 150. Her groups opened slightly at distance as they had to, but her accuracy remained exceptional. At 150 meters with an 8-mile-per-hour crosswind, she put 5 rounds into a group you could cover with a silver dollar. When he finally asked where she had learned to shoot, she told him the truth. "My father taught me sergeant. He served in the First War, and before that I hunted rats in Chicago." Cross was quiet for a moment, studying her with those squinted eyes that had seen more death than any person should have to see. "You ever shoot at a living target larger than a rat?" "No, Sergeant." "You think you could?" "Yes, Sergeant." Why Evelyn met his eyes, thought about the question, about what he was really asking. "Because it would be necessary, Sergeant. And when something is necessary, you do it, whether you want to or not." Sergeant Cross told her to report to his office after dinner. When she arrived, she found him with 2 other people. A woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself only as Mrs. Davis, and a man in an army colonel's uniform who did not introduce himself at all. They asked her questions for 2 hours. About her family, her education, her motivations, about her political beliefs, her experiences with racism, her feelings about the military that had confined her to a typing pool, about her willingness to work alone, to endure hardship, to take lives in service of her mission. She answered honestly. She talked about her father and the pride he took in his service despite everything the country had done to him. She talked about wanting to prove that black women were capable of more than the roles they were assigned. She talked about seeing the war as an opportunity, perhaps the only opportunity she would ever have to demonstrate her abilities on a stage where they could not be ignored or dismissed. The colonel leaned forward. "If you are captured, you will be treated as a spy, most likely executed. You understand this?" "Yes, sir." Mrs. Davis spoke next, her voice softer but no less serious. "Even if you succeed, the military may bury your record, may never acknowledge what we allowed you to do. You might serve with distinction and die without recognition. Can you accept that Evelyn thought about her father, about the bronze star wrapped in paper, about the limp that reminded him every day of what he had given to a country that would not claim him?" "I understand, ma'am. But 47 American soldiers died 3 days ago because nobody could make the shot they needed. I can make that shot. That matters more than whether anyone knows my name." They told her to return to her barracks and wait. 3 days later, she was informed that she had been selected for advanced training as an OSS operative specializing in precision marksmanship. She was, though no one said it explicitly, the first black woman in American history to be trained as a combat sniper. She stood in front of the mirror in her new uniform, corporal's stripes on the sleeves, looking at her own face and knowing that her life had just changed in ways she could not fully comprehend yet. Somewhere in her future, 300 meters away, a young German gunner was cleaning his weapon, preparing for another day of killing American soldiers. He did not know that she existed, did not know that she was coming for him, but she knew, and she would not miss. The next 6 months were the most challenging and exhilarating of Evelyn Hartwell's life. She trained at a series of facilities across the eastern United States, never staying in one place for more than a few weeks, learning skills that ranged from the technical to the seemingly impossible. Long-range shooting with the Springfield 1903 that would become her primary weapon. Silent movement through forests, fields, urban environments, hand-to-hand combat, demolitions, radio operation, survival techniques, resistance to interrogation, parachute jumping, the French language in which she became reasonably fluent, and above all the art of patience, of waiting for hours or days in uncomfortable positions in bad weather under constant threat for a single opportunity that might last only a fraction of a second. Her primary instructor during this period was a British commando named Major Edward Stone. He had spent 2 years operating behind German lines in France, had personally trained more than a dozen snipers now deployed throughout the European theatre. He was a small, quiet man with a scholar's vocabulary and a killer's eyes. And he pushed Evelyn harder than she had ever been pushed in her life. The first time she missed a target during training a silhouette at 400 meters in a crosswind, he made her run 5 miles, then set up and take the shot again. When she missed again, he made her run 5 more miles. By the end of that day, she had run nearly 30 miles and taken the shot 11 times. She finally made it on the 12th attempt, her muscles screaming, her vision blurred with exhaustion, operating on nothing but will and the refusal to fail. That Major Stone told her was the point. The shot you take when you're exhausted, uncomfortable and afraid, that's the shot that matters. Anyone can hit a target on a calm day with a full night's sleep. Snipers hit targets when everything is working against them. He also taught her the psychological dimensions of her work, the weight of taking a life deliberately from a distance, with time to think about what she was doing. Some snipers are destroyed by this weight, he told her one evening as they cleaned weapons. They see faces in their dreams. They cannot reconcile the intimacy of looking at a person through a scope with the finality of what they do next. He paused, met her eyes. Others feel nothing, and that is perhaps worse, a kind of death inside that makes them something less than human. What's the answer, sir? There is no answer, Hartwell, only a choice. Feel the weight, understand what you're doing, know that it's necessary, that it serves a purpose larger than yourself. That the alternative, allowing those you target to continue their work, is worse than the act of stopping them. Evelyn thought about those words during the long nights in her barracks bunk, thought about the faces of the men she would target through her scope, men with families perhaps, with hopes and fears and reasons for what they did. She thought about whether she could do what was being asked of her. She decided that she could, because the alternative was to accept that her life would be defined by limitations others placed on her. Because somewhere in France, American soldiers were being cut down by German machine guns, and she had the ability to stop it. Because her father had served, and now it was her turn. In May 1944, Evelyn Hartwell was deployed to England as part of a team of OSS operatives preparing for the invasion of France. She was given the rank of corporal, assigned to a unit that existed only on paper, told that she would be inserted into France shortly after the initial landings to conduct targeted operations against high-value German positions. The team she joined consisted of 4 other operatives. Garrett Pierce, 28, a demolitions expert from Ohio who had been a mining engineer before the war. Quiet, precise, the kind of man who measured twice and cut once. Rosemary Walsh, 25, a radio operator from Boston with a sharp Irish accent and 4 languages spoken fluently. She had a gift for voices for hearing patterns in static that others missed. Victor Kowalski, 30, a Polish-American who had been a Chicago police officer, specialized in close-quarters combat and urban operations, had seen enough street violence to understand that survival often came down to who acted first. Silas Whitmore, 27, a reconnaissance specialist from Virginia who had an almost supernatural ability to move through any terrain without being detected. Men who worked with him swore he could disappear in an empty room. They were a strange group, brought together not by shared background or natural affinity, but by complementary skills and a willingness to operate outside normal military structures. They trained together for 3 weeks in the English countryside, learning to function as a unit, to anticipate each other's movements, to communicate through gestures and glances when silence was essential. Evelyn was the only sniper, the only black person, one of only 2 women. She waited for resentment, for challenges to her presence, for the resistance she had encountered throughout her life. It did not come. On the second day of training, Garrett Pierce asked her one question. "Can you hit a target at 200 meters? Evelyn took the rifle he offered, fired 10 rounds. 10 holes in the center ring. Garrett nodded once. Good. We need someone who can actually shoot straight. That was the extent of the evaluation. These were people who had been selected precisely because they could see past conventional categories, who judged others solely by capability. Rosemary Walsh had faced her own discrimination as an Irish Catholic woman in a Protestant-dominated intelligence agency. She recognized a kindred spirit. Victor Kowalski had worked with black officers in the Chicago police who had impressed him more than most of his white colleagues. Silas Whitmore was simply indifferent to everything except competence and mission success. They did not become friends exactly. The work was too intense, the stakes too high, the future too uncertain for the normal processes of friendship. But they became something perhaps more valuable, a team that trusted each other completely. That would risk their lives for each other without hesitation. That functioned as a single organism with 5 bodies and 1 purpose. Evelyn Hartwell was inserted into France on June 10, 1944, 4 days after the initial landings. She parachuted into a field outside Carentan with Garrett Pierce. The other 3 members of her team landed several kilometers away. The plan was to link up within 24 hours, but German patrols were heavier than expected. It took them 3 days to finally reunite at a farmhouse run by a French family who supported the resistance. The family was named Fournier, a father, mother, and 3 children ranging in age from 8 to 16. They had been sheltering escaped prisoners and downed pilots for more than 2 years, at constant risk of discovery and execution. When Evelyn entered their kitchen and removed her helmet, revealing her face for the first time, the youngest child, a girl named Sylvie, stared at her with undisguised wonder. She had never seen a black person before. She asked her mother in rapid French if the American lady was made of chocolate. Madame Fournier hushed her daughter, apologized to Evelyn in embarrassed tones. Evelyn laughed, the first time she had laughed in days. She knelt down to Sylvie's level, spoke in careful accented French. "I am not made of chocolate, but I wish I were. Then I would never be hungry." Sylvie considered this seriously. Then she offered Evelyn a piece of bread from her own small ration. It was one of the most generous gifts Evelyn would receive during the entire war. The team spent 2 weeks operating from the Fournier farmhouse and other safe locations, conducting reconnaissance, small-scale sabotage, gathering intelligence as American forces slowly pushed inland from the beaches. Evelyn did not fire her rifle during this period. The missions did not call for her particular skills, but she was learning the terrain, the German positions, the patterns of movement and reinforcement that would inform her work when the time came. That time came on August 12, 1944, when the team received orders to investigate a German position blocking the American advance towards Saint-Côme, a position that had already claimed 47 American lives in 72 hours. The briefing was held in a commandeered barn 3 kilometers behind the front lines. Maps spread across hay bales, the smell of animals and cordite and unwashed men. The intelligence officer's voice was flat, exhausted. The voice of someone who had delivered too many of these briefings, who had watched too many red X marks appear on too many maps. 47 KYA in 3 days, 4 failed attempts to neutralize the position, 2 infantry assaults, 1 artillery barrage that missed, 1 tank disabled before it could get within effective range. He pointed to the map. A farmhouse, stone construction. 2nd floor commanding excellent sightlines across the surrounding fields. Primary weapon is an MG-42. Overlapping fields of fire from secondary positions. Communication trenches connecting all defensive points. Stone walls nearly a meter thick. He paused, looked at the assembled team. The primary gunner is 18 years old. Name is Friedrich Weber, graduate of German sniper school. 47 confirmed kills in 72 hours. Already eliminated 2 Allied snipers who attempted to engage him. The room was silent. Someone coughed. Rain drummed on the barn roof. The boy is a prodigy. He doesn't just react. He anticipates. Positions himself 3 moves ahead. We've tried everything conventional. Nothing works. The officer looked around the room. His eyes were hollow. We need something unconventional, or we need to accept that this position stays in German hands and the advance stalls here. That was when Evelyn stood up. I can make the shot, sir. The briefing ended. The team gathered around the map. Silas Whitmore had just returned from an 18-hour reconnaissance mission. He'd spent the entire time lying motionless in a drainage ditch 400 meters from the German position, watching, counting, mapping fields of fire in his mind. His report was not encouraging. It's not what they think it is. Not one reinforced machine gun nest. It's a coordinated defensive system. 3 positions, all interconnected by communication trenches. Overlapping fields of fire covering every approach. He traced lines on the map with a dirt-stained finger. Primary position here, 2nd floor of the main farmhouse, MG-42. Excellent sight lines, stone walls nearly a meter thick. He looked at Evelyn. The shooter is exceptional. I watched him engage targets at ranges that shouldn't be possible with that weapon. He doesn't waste ammunition. Every burst is deliberate, precise. He's been trained well. Garrett Pierce leaned over the map. Demolitions approach. Silas shook his head. They'd see you coming. The secondary positions have clear views of every logical approach route. Victor suggested a diversionary assault. Draw their attention while a smaller team infiltrates from another direction. The overlapping fields of fire make that problematic. There's no angle of approach that isn't covered by at least one of the positions. Evelyn traced the map, calculating distances in her head. Wind factors. Bullet drop at 300 meters. The angle of elevation. Show me the blind spots. Silas looked at her. Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or concern. There aren't many. The Germans built this position to be impregnable to conventional assault. He pointed to the northeast corner. Here, there's a gap, about 30 meters wide. One of the outbuildings partially blocks the view from the main farmhouse. The secondary positions can't see it unless they know to look there specifically. Range from that gap to the primary position. 300 meters, give or take. Angle is difficult. You'd be shooting slightly upward through a window opening maybe 1 meter tall and 2 meters wide, and you'd only see a portion of the window. The rest is blocked by the outbuilding. What's my field of view? Maybe 40% of the window. You'd have to wait for the target to move into your limited sight picture. You'd have one chance, maybe less than a second, to acquire aim and fire. Evelyn studied the map, running calculations. She'd made harder shots in training, but training targets didn't shoot back. I can make it. Silas's voice was careful. If you miss, your muzzle flash reveals your position. The secondary guns will have you zeroed in within seconds. You'd be cut down before you could displace. Then I won't miss. Garrett asked the question that mattered. What are the odds, Evie? She considered lying, considered inflating her confidence to make them feel better. But these were people who deserved truth. I don't know. It depends on factors I can't predict until I'm in position. The light, the wind, the exact position of the target when he moves into my sight picture. She paused. But I've spent 10 years learning to make impossible shots. I spent 4 years putting pellets through bottle caps at 30 meters. I spent 2 years learning from my father and 6 months learning from Major Stone. Every shot I've ever taken has prepared me for this one. She looked around at each of them. And if I don't take it, how many more Americans die tomorrow? How many the day after that? No one answered. They knew she was right. The commander arrived that afternoon, reviewed the plan, asked technical questions about sight lines and firing positions. Then he turned to Evelyn. You understand what you're proposing, Corporal? Yes, sir. You're valuable. Your skills will be needed for future operations. Sacrificing yourself for a single position, however troublesome, might not be the wisest use of resources. He didn't mention her race or gender. He didn't need to. The implication was clear. Was she sure she wanted to risk her life for a country that did not fully accept her? Evelyn had been asked variations of this question her entire life. By teachers who suggested she aim lower. By recruiters who told her to be realistic. By a world that wanted her to know her place. She gave the commander the same answer she always gave. Those 47 dead soldiers were Americans, sir. My countrymen. Their lives matter regardless of how this country treats me. I have the skills for this mission. If I don't use them, I have to live with knowing I could have acted and chose not to. The commander nodded slowly. The operation is approved. You'll insert tomorrow night. The next 24 hours were the longest of Evelyn's life. She prepared her equipment with obsessive care, cleaned her Springfield until it gleamed, checked and rechecked her ammunition, each round inspected for defects, each one loaded into magazines with precise attention. She studied Silas's sketches until she could see the position with her eyes closed, calculated angles and distances and wind effects, ran through the shot sequence in her mind hundreds of times. 300 meters, southwest wind at approximately 7 kilometers per hour. That meant 8 inches of left drift, 3-degree upward angle, 6 inches of elevation adjustment, temperature 18 degrees Celsius, humidity 68%. All factors accounted for, all variables managed. She zeroed her rifle for exactly 300 meters, adjusted for the humidity, made notes about sight picture and holdover, and she thought about what she was about to do. Not the shot itself, which she had practiced thousands of times, but the finality of it, the life she would end. Major Stone had prepared her for this moment, had told her to feel the weight but carry it anyway. She felt it now, felt the heaviness of what she was about to do, the knowledge that a man she had never met would die because of her action, that his family would grieve, that his story would end. She did not try to push this feeling away. She held it, examined it, accepted it, and then she set it aside and focused on her mission. That evening she wrote a letter to her parents, told them she loved them, thanked them for everything they had taught her, asked them to understand that what she was doing was necessary. She folded the letter and put it in her pocket. She would not send it, but writing it helped. At midnight she tried to sleep, failed, lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, thinking about her father's words. It's what we do. Somewhere in that farmhouse 300 meters away, Friedrich Weber was also preparing for tomorrow, cleaning his weapon, checking ammunition belts, reading letters from home that told him his mother was worried about him. He was 18 years old, thin face, dark hair, tired eyes that had seen too much death for someone so young. 47 kills in 3 days weighed on him in ways he couldn't articulate, but orders were orders. The Americans kept coming, and he kept shooting. He didn't know that tomorrow someone would come for him, someone who never missed. Midnight, August 15th, 1944. The team inserted under cover of darkness, moving in single file through hedgerows and fields, 5 meters apart, hand signals only, stopping every few minutes to listen for patrols. The night was warm and humid, the air thick with the smell of vegetation and distant smoke. Artillery rumbled somewhere to the east, a constant background thunder that had become so familiar it barely registered. Rosemary Walsh remained at the safe house to monitor radio communications. The other 4 moved toward the German position like ghosts. They reached the approach point at 0430, perhaps 90 minutes until dawn. Silas Whitmore led Evelyn to the edge of the corridor he had identified, the gap in the German defences that would give her the shot. From here, she would proceed alone. Garrett Pierce squeezed her shoulder once, a gesture of solidarity and good luck. Good hunting, Evie. Then they were gone, melting into the darkness, taking up positions to provide covering fire if she was detected and to support her withdrawal after the shot. Evelyn began her approach. The corridor was approximately 150 meters long, running along the base of a gentle slope covered with tall grass and scattered brush. She moved slowly, staying low, pausing every few meters to scan for threats. The grass was wet with dew. It soaked through her uniform within minutes, the moisture cold against her skin. A slight breeze came from the southwest, perhaps 5 to 7 kilometers per hour. She would need to account for that in her aim. She reached the depression behind the stone wall at 0515, approximately 45 minutes until sunrise. She settled into position, arranged her equipment with methodical precision. The Springfield placed carefully on the stone, her body positioned for maximum stability and minimum exposure. She began her observation. Through the scope she could see the second-floor window of the farmhouse, a dark rectangle approximately 2 meters wide and 1 meter tall. The machine gun was positioned in the right side of the window, its barrel just visible in the pre-dawn darkness. But the gunner was not at his weapon. She would have to wait. Waiting was what she had trained for. Waiting was what she did better than almost anything else. 4 counts in, 6 counts out. The rhythm her father had taught her at that kitchen table in Chicago. The patience he had drilled into her through 10,000 practice sessions with rats that gave no second chances. She monitored the wind, watching the grass move, feeling it against her face, calculating the drift it would cause at 300 meters. The sun rose at 0602. The light changed from grey to gold, illuminating the farmhouse and the fields around it. Evelyn could now see the interior of the second-floor room more clearly. The machine gun, the sandbags stacked around it, the dark space behind it where the gunner would sit. Still no movement. She continued to wait. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. Her muscles began to ache from holding the same position. She ignored the discomfort, focused on the window, on the breathing, on the absolute stillness that would make the shot possible. At 0647, she saw him, a figure moving in the shadows at the back of the room, stepping forward toward the machine gun. She could not see him clearly yet. Just a shape, a suggestion of movement. She placed her finger on the trigger, took up the slack, prepared to fire the moment he stepped into the light. He did. And Evelyn Hartwell froze. The gunner was young. That was her first thought. He could not have been more than 18 or 19. Thin face, dark hair that fell across his forehead. He looked tired. He looked scared. He looked like a boy who had been placed behind a terrible machine and told to do terrible things, who had done them because he did not know what else to do. Friedrich Weber. Through the scope she could see details that made him human. A small scar on his left cheek, the way he rubbed his eyes as if trying to wake himself up. The slight tremor in his hands as he checked the machine gun's belt feed. For a fraction of a second, Evelyn hesitated. She saw not a target, but a person. Someone's son, someone's brother, someone with a life and a future that she was about to end. She felt the weight that Major Stone had warned her about, and for that moment it was too heavy to bear. Then she thought about the 47 American soldiers who had died because of this boy's aim. She thought about their families, their futures, their lives that had ended in fields just like this one. She thought about the soldiers who would die today if she did not act, who were probably already moving into position for another assault, trusting that the obstacle would be removed. She thought about her father, about the kitchen table lessons, about the weight he had carried for 25 years, the burden of serving a country that would not claim him, the cost of doing what was necessary even when it broke something inside you. and she understood that this was what it meant to serve, not glory, not recognition, not the clean satisfaction of simple choices. This, the terrible necessity of doing what had to be done, feeling the full weight of it, and carrying on anyway. She exhaled slowly. 6-count breath, just like her father had taught her. She made her final calculations. 300 meters exact, wind 6 kilometers per hour from the southwest, 8 inches of left drift, 3-degree upward angle, 6 inches of elevation, temperature 18, humidity 68. She adjusted her aim, compensating for every factor, every variable. 10 years of training condensed into this single moment. The crosshairs settled on Friedrich Weber's chest, center mass, 18 inches from the window edge. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, she fired. The Springfield made a single sharp crack that echoed across the fields. Through the scope, Evelyn saw Friedrich Weber jerk backward and fall. She did not see him hit the ground. She was already moving, breaking down her position, preparing to withdraw. She had rehearsed this a dozen times in her mind, the exact sequence of actions, the precise route she would take, the timing that would get her out of the corridor before the German response. But there was no response. The secondary positions, which should have opened fire the moment they heard the shot, remained silent. The farmhouse, which should have erupted with activity as the defenders scrambled to locate the threat, was still. For a long moment, nothing happened at all. Then Garrett Pierce's voice came over her earpiece, calm but with an undercurrent of confusion. "Target down." No movement from secondary positions. "Evie, I think they're confused. They don't know what happened." Evelyn realized what had occurred. Her shot had been so precise, so unexpected, that the other defenders did not understand what they were seeing. Their commander, their exceptional gunner, had simply fallen. There had been no assault, no artillery, no obvious threat, just a man collapsing at his weapon with no apparent cause. They did not know they were under attack. They did not know where to shoot. This confusion lasted perhaps 30 seconds, but 30 seconds was enough. Silas Whitmore's voice came through next. "Secondary gunners withdrawing to the farmhouse. They're abandoning the outbuildings." This was the opportunity. With the secondary positions unmanned, American forces could advance through corridors that had been covered before. If they moved quickly, they could overrun the farmhouse before the defenders reorganized. Garrett was already on the radio to command, reporting the situation, requesting immediate support. Within minutes, the message was relayed up the chain of command. A company of infantry that had been waiting for the order began moving toward the position. The assault on the farmhouse took less than 20 minutes. The defenders, disorganized and demoralized by the loss of their leader, offered only scattered resistance. By 0730, the position was in American hands. The road to Sancombe was open, and the count of American dead stopped at 47. Evelyn Hartwell did not participate in the assault. Her mission was complete. Her orders were to withdraw to the team's rally point and await extraction. She moved through the corridor she had traversed earlier, her mind strangely empty, her body operating on the automatic discipline of her training. She did not think about what she had done. She did not think about anything at all. She reached the rally point at 0800 and found her team waiting for her. Garrett Pierce embraced her. A quick, fierce hug that surprised them both. Victor Kowalski nodded once, his version of high praise. Silas Whitmore simply said, "Clean shot." Rosemary Walsh was monitoring radio traffic. She reported that American forces had secured the farmhouse with minimal casualties. The position that had claimed 47 American lives in 3 days had been neutralized with no additional losses. The company commander was calling it a miracle. It was not a miracle. It was a single bullet placed precisely at exactly the right moment by a woman who had spent her entire life preparing for that moment. But Evelyn did not say this. She did not say anything. She sat down against a tree, closed her eyes, allowed herself to feel for the first time the magnitude of what she had done. The weight was there, just as Major Stone had promised. She had taken a life. She had looked through her scope at a young man's face and decided that he would die. She would carry that weight for the rest of her life, would see that face in quiet moments, would wonder about who he had been and what he might have become. This was the cost of what she had done, and she would pay it. But she had also saved lives. The soldiers who would have died in the next assault, and the next and the next. They would go home to their families because of what she had done. The 47 who had already fallen were beyond her help. But she had stopped the count there, had prevented the number from growing. This was not redemption. It did not balance the scales or erase the weight. But it was something. It was the reason she had pulled the trigger. Part 3. The wait. The team was extracted that evening and returned to their base in England for debriefing. The rain had started again, cold and persistent, the kind of rain that soaked through everything. Captain Morrison commended Evelyn's performance in a meeting that lasted less than 10 minutes. He recommended her for decoration. The recommendation would, as Mrs. Davis had warned, disappear into the bureaucracy without result. The official record of the action at Saint-Côme would credit the assault to the infantry company that had taken the farmhouse. Evelyn Hartwell's name would appear nowhere. She was not surprised. She had known from the beginning that her service might never be acknowledged, that she was operating outside the boundaries of what the military was willing to admit. She had accepted this condition when she took the assignment, and she found now in the moment that it mattered less than she had expected. She knew what she had done. Her team knew. That would have to be enough. But the story did not end there, because while the official military bureaucracy was content to bury Evelyn Hartwell's contribution, the soldiers who had been there wanted to know what had happened. How had the position fallen so quickly? Why had the legendary gunner suddenly dropped at his weapon? Who had taken the shot that opened the road to Saint-Côme? Rumors spread through the ranks as rumors do. A sniper, some said. An OSS operative. A woman, according to others. One of those secret agents who did things the regular military could not. And a black woman whispered a few who had heard something from someone who had seen something. A black woman sniper. Could that be true? Could the military actually have allowed such a thing? The soldiers did not know whether to believe these rumors. They seemed too strange, too far outside the bounds of how the world was supposed to work. But they repeated them anyway. One of these soldiers was Sergeant First Class Robert Holden, a 34-year-old from Georgia who had lost his best friend in the third assault on the Saint-Côme position. Holden was not a man who questioned the racial order of the military or society. He had grown up in the segregated South and accepted its categories as natural and proper. But he had also learned over 18 months of combat that courage and competence did not follow the color lines he had been taught to expect. So when he heard the rumor about a black woman sniper, he did not dismiss it out of hand. In September 1944, when his company was rotated back to England for rest and refit, he started asking questions. It took him 2 weeks to find someone who would talk. An OSS officer, 3 drinks into an evening at a London pub, confirmed that the rumors were true, that a Negro woman named Hartwell had indeed taken the shot at Saint-Côme, that she was one of the best marksmen the agency had ever trained. The officer would not say more, but he did not need to. Holden wrote a letter to his hometown newspaper describing what he had learned, writing that a colored woman had saved his life and the lives of dozens of other American soldiers, that she deserved recognition for her service regardless of her race or sex. The letter was not published, but Holden had sent copies to other papers as well, papers in New York, Chicago, Washington. The Chicago Defender, the most influential black newspaper in the country, did not ignore him. On October 28, 1944, they published Holden's letter under the headline, "Georgia Sergeant Credits Negro Woman Sniper with Saving His Life." The story was picked up by other black papers across the country. Within a week, Evelyn Hartwell was famous, at least within the black community. Her name was spoken in churches and barber shops, in living rooms and factory break rooms. The military was not pleased. OSS operations were classified. The revelation of Hartwell's identity violated security protocols. More importantly, her sudden fame threatened to force the military to acknowledge her service. Evelyn was pulled from active operations, assigned to administrative duties at the OSS facility in London. She was not disciplined. Her performance had been too exemplary for that. But she was effectively benched, removed from the work she had trained to do. She accepted this with the same composure she had brought to every other obstacle in her career. Colonel William Donovan, the founder and director of the OSS, pushed back against the pressure to sideline Hartwell. He argued that she was too valuable to waste on administrative work. He did not win the argument entirely, but he won enough of it to get Hartwell back into training for future operations. She returned to active duty in December 1944. Just as the German counteroffensive in the Ardennes was beginning, the OSS needed every capable operative it had. Evelyn Hartwell was inserted into Belgium on December 23, 1944. Her mission: identify and neutralize German command and control positions coordinating the offensive. The conditions were brutal: deep snow, bitter cold that turned fingers numb in seconds, limited supplies, German forces advancing faster than anyone had anticipated. She spent the next 3 weeks operating alone in the forests of the Ardennes, moving from position to position, taking shots when opportunities presented themselves, gathering intelligence when they did not. She would later say that those weeks were the hardest of her service, not because of the physical conditions, though they were severe, Not because of the danger, though it was constant, but because of the isolation. Long days and nights with no one to talk to. No one to confirm that she was still human, still connected to the world she was fighting to protect. She talked to herself sometimes just to hear a voice, recited poetry she had memorized as a child, composed letters to her parents that she would never send. The cold was relentless. It worked its way into everything, into her clothes, her equipment, her bones. At night, she dug shallow scrapes in the snow and huddled beneath pine branches, trying to conserve what little warmth her body could generate. She ate cold rations because fires would give away her position. She melted snow in her mouth for water because the streams were frozen solid. And she waited, for hours, for days, for German officers to move into range. She made 7 confirmed kills during the Ardennes campaign. 7 German officers and senior NCOs whose removal disrupted enemy operations and saved American lives. She was never detected, never engaged. She moved through the forests like a ghost, appearing, striking, vanishing before anyone knew she was there. When she was finally extracted in mid-January 1945, she had lost 18 pounds, had frostbite on 3 toes that would trouble her for the rest of her life. Her hands shook for days afterward. Not from fear, but from the accumulated exhaustion of 3 weeks alone in conditions that should have killed her. Captain Morrison told her that her performance had been extraordinary, that she had contributed more to the American defensive effort than many entire units. He told her that she would receive a Bronze Star for her service, a decoration that would be awarded secretly, recorded in a classified file, never publicly acknowledged. Evelyn thanked him. Then she asked when she could return to the field. She was deployed twice more before the war in Europe ended. Once into Germany itself in March 1945, once into Austria in late April. These operations were shorter, less intense. By then the German military was collapsing. There were fewer high-value targets to engage. But Evelyn performed her duties with the same precision and dedication she had shown from the beginning. By the time Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, she had 18 confirmed kills, 18 enemies who would not threaten American soldiers again because of her skill and courage. The war in Europe was over. But for Evelyn Hartwell, the struggle was just beginning. Evelyn returned to the United States in June 1945. The OSS was dissolved in October. She was given an honorable discharge, a final handshake from Captain Morrison, and a train ticket back to Chicago. Her service record was classified. Her decorations noted only in files that would not be opened for decades. As far as the official military history was concerned, she had spent the war typing and filing at Fort Des Moines. She returned to her parents' apartment on the south side, to the same 2 rooms where she had grown up, where she had first learned to shoot. Her father was there, older now, frailer, the limp more pronounced than before. Her mother embraced her and wept, and thanked God for bringing her daughter home safely. They did not ask about what she had done during the war. They had learned from Nathaniel's experience that some things could not be spoken about, that some weights had to be carried alone. Evelyn tried to find work. She was 24 years old, high school education, 3 years of classified military experience she could not mention. She applied for secretarial positions. Was told she was overqualified. She applied for factory jobs. Was told the positions had been filled by returning soldiers. She applied at the same insurance company where she had worked before the war. Was told they had no openings. The country that had used her skills to win the war had no place for her now that it was over. She found work eventually, a position as a file clerk at a black-owned law firm. It paid less than she had earned before the war. She took it because she needed money, because she had no other options. She spent her days organizing documents and typing briefs, using perhaps 1% of her capabilities, trying not to think about what she had been and what she had done. The years passed. Her father died in 1952, his heart finally giving out after years of strain from his old wounds. Evelyn was with him at the end, holding his hand, telling him that she was proud of him, that his service had mattered even if the country had not recognized it. He looked at her with eyes that knew everything she had not told him. "I'm proud of you too, baby girl." Then he was gone. Her mother passed 5 years later, and Evelyn was alone. She continued her work at the law firm, rising eventually to office manager, a position of modest responsibility and equally modest compensation. She lived quietly, modestly, invisibly, the life that America had prescribed for women like her. But something was changing in the country. The civil rights movement was growing, challenging the segregation and discrimination that had confined black Americans for generations. In 1954, the Supreme Court declared school segregation unconstitutional. In 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and spoke of his dream. Evelyn watched these events with growing hope and growing frustration. Hope because change seemed finally possible, because the structures that had limited her life were beginning to crack. Frustration because she had fought for this country, had risked her life and taken lives in its service, and still she was invisible. Still her contribution was unacknowledged. Still the military that had used her pretended she did not exist. She began to write in 1963. Not for publication, not at first, just for herself, to record what she had done and what she had seen. She wrote for 5 years, filling notebook after notebook with her small, precise handwriting. When she finished, she had more than 500 pages, a complete account of her time with the OSS, from recruitment to discharge. She did not know what to do with it. The story seemed too improbable to be believed, and she had no documentation to support it. Who would take seriously a black woman file clerk who claimed to have been a sniper in the Second World War? The answer came in 1968. A young historian named Dr. Patricia Reynolds contacted her. Reynolds was writing a book about African-American women who had served in the military during the war. She had come across the old Chicago Defender article about Evelyn Hartwell. She wanted to know if the story was true. She wanted to interview Evelyn for her book. Evelyn hesitated. She had spent more than 20 years in silence, keeping her history buried, protecting herself from disbelief and dismissal. The idea of speaking openly of subjecting herself to scrutiny and potential ridicule was frightening, but she also knew that she could not carry this weight alone forever. She needed to share it. She needed the truth to be known. She agreed to the interview. Then she gave Dr. Reynolds her notebooks. Patricia Reynolds was stunned by what she read. Here was not merely an account of military service, but a detailed chronicle of OSS operations in France and Belgium, written by a participant with direct knowledge of missions that remained classified. Here was evidence of a black woman serving in a combat role decades before such service was officially permitted. Here was a story that challenged virtually everything the military had said about race and gender and capability. But Reynolds was also a careful scholar. She knew that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence. She could not simply take Evelyn's notebooks at face value. She needed corroboration. She began to research. It took her 2 years, but she found it. In the newly opened archives of the OSS, she discovered personnel records confirming Evelyn Hartwell's service as an operative, her training as a marksman, her deployment to France and Belgium. She found after-action reports from the Saint-Côme operation that mentioned, though did not name a sniper who had neutralized the German position. She found Captain Morrison's recommendation for the Bronze Star, the one that had been awarded secretly and buried. And she found Garrett Pierce. Pierce had survived the war and returned to Ohio, where he worked as an engineer and raised 3 children. He had never forgotten Evelyn Hartwell or the missions they had conducted together. When Reynolds contacted him in 1970, he agreed immediately to be interviewed. He described the Saint-Côme operation in detail, confirming every element of Evelyn's account. He described her as the finest marksman he had ever seen, one of the bravest soldiers he had served with. He said she deserved to be honored for what she had done, that it was a disgrace she had been forgotten. Reynolds interviewed the other surviving members of the team as well. Rosemary Walsh, who had become a translator at the State Department, Victor Kowalski, who had returned to the Chicago police and risen to captain. They all told the same story. They all remembered Evelyn Hartwell. Reynolds published her book in 1972. Invisible Warriors, African-American Women in the Second World War. An entire chapter was devoted to Evelyn Hartwell, describing her life, her training, her service, and her long years of anonymity. The book included photographs, excerpts from Evelyn's notebooks, statements from her former teammates. It was the first public documentation of what Evelyn had done. The book received modest attention when it was published, positive reviews in academic journals and the black press, limited coverage elsewhere. But it planted a seed. People now knew that Evelyn Hartwell existed, that her story was real, that the rumors from 1944 had been true. Over the years that followed, her story spread, cited in other histories, mentioned in documentaries, taught in classrooms. She became gradually a symbol of the hidden contributions that Black Americans had made to the war effort. In 1977, Evelyn agreed to speak at a conference on women in the military. Her first public appearance since the publication of Reynolds's book. She was 56 years old, retired now from the law firm, living on a small pension and Social Security. She walked to the podium with the help of a cane. Her frostbitten toes had never fully healed. She looked out at an audience of perhaps 200 people, most of them women, many of them black, all of them waiting to hear her story. She spoke for an hour. She described her childhood on the South Side, her father's teachings, her determination to serve. She described her training, her deployment, her missions. She described the farmhouse at Saint-Côme, the approach through the corridor, the wait for the gunner to appear, the moment of hesitation when she saw his face. And then she described the shot, the exhale, the trigger pull, the single sharp crack of the rifle. The young man falling backward and out of her sight. "I do not regret what I did," she said quietly. "The mission was necessary. The lives I saved were worth the lives I took. But I want you to understand that there was no glory in it, no satisfaction, no triumph." She paused. Let the silence hold. There was only doing what had to be done, and living with the cost. She told them that she hoped they would never have to make the choices she had made, but if they did, if they ever found themselves in a position where they had the capability and the opportunity to save lives through their own skill and courage, she hoped they would not hesitate. She hoped they would do what was necessary and carry whatever weight that brought. She received a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of women approached her, thanking her, embracing her, telling her that her story had inspired them. A young black woman in Army ROTC said that she was joining the military because of Evelyn Hartwell, that she wanted to prove that women like them could serve at the highest levels. Evelyn took the young woman's hand. "Serve with honor," she said. "Value your own humanity and the humanity of those you face. And remember that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act despite it." Recognition came slowly, but it came. Over the next 7 years, Evelyn's story continued to spread through military history circles. Documentaries interviewed her surviving teammates. Academic researchers cross-referenced her account with newly declassified OSS files. The evidence became undeniable. In 1984, the Army formally acknowledged Evelyn Hartwell's service, releasing portions of her classified record and confirming her role in operations across France, Belgium, Germany, and Austria. 3 years later, the recognition became tangible. In 1987, she was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor. In a ceremony at the Pentagon attended by her surviving teammates and dozens of officials and historians, the citation described her actions at Saint-Côme and throughout the European campaign, praising her extraordinary heroism and selfless service in combat operations. She was 66 years old. She walked to the podium with her cane, accepted the medal from the Army Chief of Staff, gave a brief speech thanking her parents, her teammates, and the country that had finally claimed her service. She did not mention the decades of invisibility, the discrimination, the deliberate erasure. She did not need to. Everyone in the room knew. The ceremony was covered by national media. A brief story, perhaps 2 minutes, buried in the middle of the broadcast. But it was enough. Evelyn Hartwell was finally officially a hero. She lived 5 more years. On October 15, 1992, she died peacefully in her apartment, surrounded by photographs of her parents and her team and the life she had built from silence and service. She was 71 years old. She was buried in Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. A black woman who had served before black people were permitted to serve. A sniper who had operated before women were allowed anywhere near combat. The headstone gave her name, her rank, and her dates of birth and death. Beneath that, a single word: marksman. Garrett Pierce attended the funeral. He was 76 himself, frail and white-haired, using a wheelchair now. He sat in the front row during the service, listening as speaker after speaker praised Evelyn Hartwell's courage, her skill, her contribution to the war effort and to the cause of equality. When the service was over, he remained in his chair, looking at the flag-draped coffin. A reporter approached him, asked what he remembered most about Evelyn Hartwell. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady but soft. "I remember waiting at the rally point after Saint-Côme, not knowing if she would make it back." He paused, seemed to be seeing something far away. "I remember the relief when she appeared, moving through the trees with that smooth, silent walk she had. I remember looking at her face and seeing what she was already carrying, the knowledge of what she had done." Another pause. "And I remember thinking that I had never seen anyone so capable and so human at the same time." He looked up at the reporter. "She was the bravest person I ever knew. Not because she was fearless, she was afraid, but she did what was necessary anyway. She felt the cost and paid it anyway. She carried it and never let it crush her." His eyes returned to the coffin. "That's what courage is. Not the absence of fear, the decision to act in spite of it." The reporter thanked him and moved on. Garrett remained where he was, looking at the coffin, thinking about August 1944. about a shot that had traveled 300 meters and changed everything, thinking about a young woman from Chicago who had seen what no one else could see and had done what no one else could do. The wind stirred the flags around the graveside. Somewhere in the distance, a bugle played taps. Garrett Pierce closed his eyes. Let the memories wash over him. The fear, the chaos, the strange beauty of doing something impossible with people he trusted completely. The morning after Saint-Côme, when they had learned what Evelyn's shot had accomplished. The embraces, the tears, the overwhelming gratitude. He opened his eyes, looked at the coffin one last time. Then he nodded once. A soldier's farewell, and let his family wheel him away. Evelyn Hartwell's story did not end with her death. In the years that followed, her example continued to inspire. Historians who documented her service, soldiers who followed in her footsteps, young people who learned that barriers were meant to be broken. In 1994, the first women graduated from Army Sniper School, an achievement that would have been impossible without Evelyn and others like her who had proved what women could do. In 2015, the military opened all combat positions to women, finally acknowledging what Evelyn had demonstrated 70 years earlier. Today, her name is taught in military academies and history classes. Her Distinguished Service Cross is displayed at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., alongside her Springfield rifle and the notebooks in which she recorded her service. Visitors stand before these artifacts and read about what she did, the training, the missions, the shot at Saint-Côme that opened the road and saved the lives. But the artifacts can only tell part of the story. They cannot convey the isolation of waiting alone in a sniper's hide, the intimacy of looking at a target through a scope, the weight of the choice to fire. They cannot convey what it meant to be a black woman in a white man's military, to be dismissed and ignored and erased, to carry on anyway because the work was too important to abandon. They cannot convey the decades of silence, the anonymity, the slow and grudging recognition that came only at the end of a long life. For that, we need the story itself. In the summer of 2018, a group of ROTC cadets visited the National Museum of African American History and Culture. They stood before the display case containing Evelyn Hartwell's Distinguished Service Cross. Their instructor, a young captain who had written her thesis on women in military history, told them about the farmhouse at Saint-Côme, the fortified position, the corridor of no return, the single shot that opened the road. She told them about what it meant to take a life deliberately from a distance, with time to think about what you were doing. She told them that Evelyn Hartwell had felt that weight and carried it for 50 years, that she had done so because the alternative to stand aside when she had the ability to act was not something she could live with. The cadets listened in silence. Some of them would go on to serve in combat. Some of them would face choices similar to the one Evelyn had faced behind that stone wall. They did not know this yet, could not know what lay ahead. But they knew now that it was possible, that someone had done it before them, had felt what they might feel, had chosen what they might choose. That was the gift Evelyn Hartwell had given them. Not a formula, not a guarantee, just the knowledge that the path existed, that it could be walked, that the weight could be borne. The instructor finished her presentation, gave the cadets time to reflect. One young woman, a sophomore from Detroit, lingered at the display case after the others had moved on. She studied the medal, the rifle, the faded notebooks behind the glass. She thought about Evelyn Hartwell at her age, practicing in alleys, dreaming of something more. She made a silent promise to herself that day, to serve with honor, to push past every barrier, to carry whatever weight was asked of her, to never forget. Outside the museum, the sun set over Washington, painting the sky gold and rose. The cadets gathered on the steps, talking quietly. In a few years, they would scatter across the world to missions they couldn't yet imagine. They would face impossible choices and pay terrible costs. But they would carry Evelyn Hartwell with them. Not just her story, but her lesson that some weights are worth carrying, that courage isn't fearlessness. That serving with honor means doing what's necessary, even when no one will ever know your name, even when history tries to erase you, even when the only reward is knowing you did what was right. The museum closed for the evening. The lights dimmed. The artifacts remained. The story of a girl from Chicago who learned to shoot rats in alleys and became one of the finest snipers America ever produced, a woman who took 18 lives and saved hundreds more, a soldier who served in silence and was finally remembered for what she truly was, a hero who taught us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it, the silent shot that changed everything.